Welcome to the DNA Talks podcast, where we take on the mission of unlocking the code of your genetics. This season is all about you, upgrading your health, not just on the surface, but down to the root cause. Join us as your clinicians at the DNA company investigate your DNA and beyond. The intention of this podcast is to enhance your lifestyle by changing what is in your control. This does not substitute the medical advice given by your personal doctor, therapist, and other healthcare professionals. Good evening again, everybody. And we have joining us today, Guerry. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you. Great to be here with you again.
Yeah, I haven't seen you in person in a while, but the first time we met was in person at a conference. And, Guerry, just so everybody knows, when you go to an event, a conference, when you're part of a community, there's always that one guy who's the OG, the guy that knows everybody and everybody knows the guy. And that's him. Third Rock has been around for quite a while, pioneer in terms of bringing health to personal care products and beyond, the science. And we're going to dive into that and why this is a need. Just before we get going, if anyone has questions along the way, drop in the Q&A box. We will get to questions later on. Just make sure you go into the Q&A box as opposed to the chat, because they may get lost as people keep chatting. But we'll get to your questions. First, we're going to get to the topic at hand, which is this, looming threat that for most of us is sort of under the radar, because it's not as obvious as your food or as, your sort of stress levels and lack of sleep and the things that you viscerally feel on a daily basis. Instead, the topic, environmental threats and chemicals, et cetera, and toxins, mostly go unregistered in terms of your awareness, right? And that's where Gary's been doing an amazing job building solutions, but firstly identifying what the problems even are. So first of all, again, thanks for being here tonight, man. This is going to be an awesome conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Cash. Great to be with you.
Yeah, it's good, man. So, I know that your work started, let's say, big corporate, right?
Right.
And
right.
you've realized there was a problem to solve, and you figured out a solution to these problems. And then all of a sudden they didn't want it. And then you took over the solution and started driving it home for people. But how bad is the problem when it comes to, say, let's take something simple like sunscreen, for example. How bad is the actual toxic load?
Well, that's a great question. I actually was in corporate for a long time, and I still am involved in corporate because as you know, I do patent work for a living. Yeah. This is a side job, but the sunscreen issue is a big deal. Toxicity of sunscreen was and remains a big deal. And that all happened for me in my life, where I had two young guys, different times, surfed with them, both got melanoma, both got diagnosed, both got told the same thing by two different dermatologists, which, by the way, and I won't go into that deep hole, but hard to get a dermatologist to even see you these days. They're so busy because of skin cancer. But what happened was they both got told, if you keep surfing, you'll get melanoma again. So at age 20, they quit. So that told me something, that this whole sunscreen thing is interesting. And then in 2000, Margaret Schlumpf, who's a toxicologist, University of Zurich, Switzerland, slathered the back of female rats with regular sunscreens, the organic sunscreens, the ones that are methoxycinnamate, avobenzone, oxybenzone, something called PABA, which is para-aminobenzoic acid. Those were all the sunscreens that are still being in use today. They're called organic because they're carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but they have nothing to do with organic foods or organic drinks. And so they were found to be endocrine disruptors, female mimicking hormones. And it immediately drew my interest. I'm a chemist by training and a PhD chemie. And because I get a journal article every week, one of the front page articles was, "Are the sunscreens safe?" This is in 2000, long time ago now. And so started reading about that, had been surfing with these guys, realized there was a problem. And she sent me her manuscript. Those are early days of the internet and email. And so she actually sent me physically her manuscript, which showed exactly what was going on, and that the toxicity was so high that these female rats' uterus was growing abnormally large. And that's how she determined they were endocrine disruptors. And so, for your audience, for the people that are listening in tonight, toxicity really has to do with cell death. My definition for it is, anything that causes death to cells, cell death. And, that's a broad, ubiquitous way of defining toxicity. This was a lot more specific because it was specific to endocrine disruptors, which are female mimicking hormones. The biggest one on the planet, of course, is the pill, which, changes the menstrual cycle for women and the ability to get pregnant. And of course, it gets into the air and it gets into the water. So we're exposed to endocrine disruptors all the time. Soy happens to be one that has genistein in it, which is a naturally occurring substance, so it has a very high concentration of phytoestrogenic compounds. And depending on your ability to cope with that can be toxic too. So, if you take toxicity as something that is cell death and you look at the sunscreens, well, the last thing you want to do is put stuff on your skin in the presence of the sun, which is, arguably the biggest free radical generator on the planet, and is going to definitely in somehow impair your immune system. And now you're putting stuff on that is going to cause you to have endocrine disruption, which means your perspiration, your urination is all going to be impaired in the presence of the sun. And then on top of it, if you throw on top of that the fact that these two young guys probably ate let's just say, fast food restaurants every day.
Yep.
Okay. Their immune system probably was impaired because they didn't have it in their family. One of them was very light skinned, so he was susceptible, of course. But even so, at age 20, you shouldn't be getting any form of skin cancer. If you live to be 65 in the United States, you will get, there's a 50-50 chance you might get some form of skin cancer. So that's obviously something else that's going on. And of course, the atmosphere has changed. Back in the 90s, we were told about the ozone hole over Australia. And I actually had been in Australia in the late 90s. And there they talk about the water quality. They talk about the air quality. They talk about the sun intensity. And everybody lives on the coast, almost 90% of the population. So they're very scared of sunscreen. And they started using inorganic sunscreen additives. So the titanium dioxide and the zinc oxide. So I started looking at all that and trying to determine, based on your original question, what's really going on here and how high is the toxicity? Well, it turns out that once her study, Margaret Slump's study, was published everywhere and got a lot of notoriety, in Denmark, they decided that they were going to remove all of the sunscreens from the shelves. And that was 2005. And so the EU, the European Union, said, hey, Danes, you guys, you can't do that. So they put it back on the shelves a year later, but they published a study and they found that the endocrine disruptors were not that bad. They only got into the urine and the blood plasma.
Not a big deal.
So you can take that. And the result of that article was that the summary is, it said, well, it's probably okay for adults because it's just a small concentration of endocrine disruptors that get there. But for young children and infants, it's probably a good idea not to use sunscreen.
So to that point, we now have this phenomenon in the United States where 1 in 3 teenage girls has considered taking her life. Suicide. Wow. Yeah, 30%. Unbelievable, right? And specifically young girls. And why? Because they are more susceptible to the outcome than the swings, that cascade of hormone disruption and how bad they feel.
Right.
We also have 30% of women trying to get pregnant in the United States now needing fertility treatment. That number is a third, right?
Right.
And these numbers, and you kind of see this 30% number across the board when you look at problems. And it's funny because when we look at things genetically, you also see about 30% of women falling in either an estrogen dominant or estrogen toxic bucket where the same threat just means so much more, right? And going back to what you said about food, there was a study done at Baylor where they took some number of, I think it was dogs actually, and they fed half of them an American diet, high in seed oils, linoleic acid, starches, and half of them carnivore, just straight meat. And they put them out in the sun. And of the animals that ate the American diet, 25% got skin cancer.
Wow.
Of the animals that ate the carnivore diet, 0.
Amazing.
Zero.
Amazing.
Having said that, you still need protection from other things like aging, and the skin needs protection. You're not meant to be out in the peak midday sun all day, right? And so then what do you do to actually protect yourself? Because we still need to get out and do things. And if the bad news of like, okay, no sunscreen, what do you do?
Right. Well, I know a lot of people have probably turned off on sunscreen completely. I started this whole thing making a new sunscreen, making something that's completely different, of course, patented, of course, all the intellectual property put together to make something really radically different. And so the answer to your question is, it really has to do, like you said, with overexposure. Well, let's talk about that, because overexposure happens in about 20 minutes for Caucasians in the United States and Canada. And even people who have, more melanin in their skin, they're even if they're darker skinned, let's just say 40 minutes, twice as long. And what does that mean? Well, people don't understand what SPF is. SPF is sun protection factor, which was developed basically by the FDA to tell us that, if you are using an SPF product that's, let's say, SPF 30, and it takes you 20 minutes in the presence of the sun to start to turn pink, then SPF sun protection factor is 30, let's say a 30 SPF sunscreen times 20 minutes is 600 minutes of protection. That's 10 hours. Well, of course, 20 minutes, I'm just getting in the water, right? I'm already overexposed by the time I get in the water, by definition. And what does that mean? Well, your skin's a pretty good indicator of how your body, your skin's your biggest organ, and your skin's going to tell your body, hey, I'm getting overexposed to what? Well, you've got all the vitamin D you need for the day. That's really what your body's saying. Yeah. And now you're starting to turn pink, and you should, try to get at least out of the sun. Or the other choice, if you're going to be active outside all day, is put something on. And of course, you can't put clothes over your face. And you can put it on your head, but again, not everybody's going to wear a hat, and you can't wear a hat when you're surfing too well unless it's a hoodie, and that's another long story. But the bottom line is, as soon as you get overexposed, you should have something, but it's not UVB. So there's something that I gave your folks. They can show it if they want to. It's a plot, and the plot helps describe what's really going on. It's a plot of UVA and UVB, and I think they can pop it up on the screen for us, maybe. And what it shows is, that there is a big difference between UVA and UVB. So that plot shows that if you look at that wavelength, you see UVB on the left and you see UVA on the right, and you see the red and the blue line, and you see that that's really everybody else's mineral sunscreen. Well, people say, well, wait a minute, I thought mineral sunscreens were safe and they were non-toxic. And the answer is, well, they are safe and they are non-toxic to some degree. However, they don't provide the real coverage in the UVA range that you need. So that green line is actually the product we developed. And you can see the absorbances all the way across from UVB to UVA. And UVA are the long penetrating rays, which cause DNA damage and aging and wrinkling. And there's another slide we'll show next. The UVB side, is where SPF is measured. Remember, SPF has only to do with UVB, the short, high energy rays that cause your skin to burn, but don't necessarily penetrate it deeply, that cause DNA damage, aging, wrinkling, and if your immune system is impaired, as my poor young guys that got skin cancer, eventually skin cancer, right? If your immune system is impaired and you've got DNA damage going on and mutations occurring, and that can lead to skin cancer. So there's another slide that shows even a little bit better about UVA versus UVB, because a lot of people just they don't really get it. UVA are these long penetrating rays. So if they show that next slide, that's the one that shows the difference between UVA and UVB in terms of the wavelength of light that shines down into the epidermis versus the dermis skin layer. And if they pull that up for a second, they'll be able to see.
We'll get that. And while we're waiting for that slide,
yes,
this is where, we're talking about toxins today, right?
Sure.
And the people point their finger at the sun as a toxin,
right?
And why the sunscreen industry is so big. And you're defining it a little bit more. You're striating it where there's these two different rays, and we don't, for the purpose of industry, they don't want that knowledge out there, because now you'll know all of a sudden what it actually is toxic or not. So the sun is healing in nature. The sun gives you life. The sun gives you red light, green light, blue light, all sorts of spectrum, depending what time of the day you're out. If you're out in the morning, you're going to have amazing healing red light. If you're out midday, you're getting something that's more damaging. And the delineation here, which we don't hear about, is the difference between UVB and UVA. So there is something that it potentially is that DNA damaging cancer causing thing, but we're not even getting protected from it. And sorry, you can dive in a little more.
No, that's perfect, Cash. And so so this shows a little bit better because people don't realize the UVB is not really getting absorbed all the way deep down into the dermis. It's getting absorbed by the epidermis by design. And that's what turns your skin pink and eventually red. And if you've ever woken up the next day being really, really sore, it's really the UVA that causes that, not the UVB. And that's because you literally have what in my science vocabulary is chain scission, which is actually division of cells. And of course, you have trillions of cells in your body. There's been a debate about how many trillion, but a lot of those cells are nerve cells. And if you split the nerve cells, you're going to have pain. And it could be, on your back, it could be on your face, it could be anywhere. And that the UVA, as you see, the rays are a lot more penetrating. And yes, you're right. We actually, and there's one last slide we can show, which really describes the toxins and how these toxins combined with the fact that you're not getting UVA protection all the way across the spectrum when you're being overexposed, how that really, and we published this in the Journal of Toxicology back in 2005. And at that time, there was only one group that came up to the speaker. I didn't give the presentation. It was my daughter's, I think, first birthday or fifth birthday or something. I don't know. I couldn't go and present it at the Journal of Toxicology Society meeting in San Diego. But, corporate came up and one of the companies said, "We're sure glad you didn't include our sunscreen in this test." So that one shows that, there are the different lists of endocrine disruptors in the inactive ingredients. So you've got two different types of ingredients in sunscreens. You've got inactives, which are not really helping with helping with the sun, but things like parabens. Most people who are listening in know what those are now. I call them plasticizers for plastics primarily. PEG, polyethylene glycol, phenols, phytoestrogens. We talked about soy. There's plenty of others. Flaxseed even has it. Pistachios even have phytoestrogens in them. Shea butter, actually, believe it or not, has phytoestrogenic compound in it. And genistein is the root of the soy phytoestrogenic one. And then the conventional sunscreens have this oxybenzone, benzophenone, homosalates, the benzylidine camphors, the octomethoxycinnamates, and PABA, which I mentioned before. So those are the quote unquote organic sunscreens. One that's left out there is avobenzone. And avobenzone is what's used in high concentrations now as a UVA absorber. But the problem is with all of these organic sunscreens, when the sun strikes them, these compounds, they start to decompose. And they become toxic when they decompose. And in fact, last summer, the big deal was they said, "Oh my gosh, we found benzene in sunscreen." And I'm like, well, 99% of the population doesn't know chemistry, but it's pretty easy to see that if you've got oxybenzone in there and you split that compound up, free benzene is going to come out, whether it's due to heat or light or both, a little bit of energy, those compounds are going to decompose. And where are they going to decompose? Well, primarily on your skin. And so now you've got, toxins on your skin, which, and you and I grew up hearing this, maybe the sunscreen is worse than no sunscreen at all. And in fact, this sort of proves it, right? It's like, your biggest organ is now getting treated with female mimicking hormones, which are toxins by definition, killing cells, including skin cells. And your body's trying to compensate for that. But the good news is, at least according to the FDA, you're not getting burnt, right? So you're getting some false sense of security that you're not turning pink. But on the other hand, you got the UVA, which is the quote unquote silent killer, the long rays that cause DNA damage, aging, and wrinkling, and potentially skin cancer if your immune system's impaired. But you're not burnt, or at least you're not burning yet. And so you stay out longer than you probably should. And, the deep penetrating rays are still getting in there.
Yeah.
So they got the whole thing sort of upside down. And it's terrible to say this, but it took me a long time to figure this out.
Yeah, it is upside down, and there's this false sense of security that develops, right? Like I'm protected, I'm going to spend extra time because I have this protection, and then you're in that, that FDA thinking of you're not burning. Well, that's just the top layer where you're looking for it, right? The UVA is penetrating and you're burning where you don't want to burn, right? And it's far, far worse, So now it's very important what Guerry said about benzene, for example, where science, chemistry, approvals, studies are all done siloed, not functionally, right? Functionally means practical application. I have this chemical. Academia will tell me something about the chemical. But the practical application is I'm going to go take this chemical out in the sun. The context is now changing. I'm not in a lab, right? And I'm going to have it on my skin. So those interactions are never considered. And this is why when you say upside down, FDA will tell you you're upside down because they're thinking about what happened in the lab, right? But you're thinking about practical, which is really the questions we need to ask. So yeah, thanks for the slide. This is helpful. So
Sure.
what I know that you've created something, and we're going to talk about that, and you've been kind enough to. Where else do we see this? So we've so far talked about sunscreen, but where else are we seeing that our personal care products are what we think are healing or protective are actually toxic?
Yeah, unfortunately, almost everywhere. So you saw on that previous slide, it said active versus inactive substances. So, if you're getting hand creams or skin lotions or shampoos or, pretty much anything you use for personal care, including Vaseline, including Neosporin, most of them, unfortunately, have toxins in them. So these chemicals were put together. I mean, people might want to know, well, why is this chemical concoction put together? What is the deal with these chemists that are making these products? And the answer is, well, first of all, the sunscreens, just to go back for 1 second, the organic sunscreens were developed because they're transparent. So when you put them on the skin, you don't see anything. Your skin's still the same. In Asia, they don't really care if their skin's white, but in Western hemisphere, people don't like white skin. And of course, you had to develop something that would hide the whiteness, which with zinc oxide is very hard to do. And with titanium dioxide, also very hard to do. So that's one issue. But getting back to your question about other personal care items, so let's say Vaseline, for example, which some people, I can name names, but maybe I shouldn't. Some people put Vaseline on their face every day. Some women to, get rid of the wrinkles and that kind of thing. Well, Vaseline is petroleum jelly. It's the Unilever trademark for petroleum jelly. And petroleum jelly has polyaromatic hydrocarbons in it, which are known to be carcinogenic, mutagenic. And so that is the basis, believe it or not. Petroleum jelly is the basis for a lot of cosmetics. It's a basis for a lot of hand lotions, a lot of skin lotions, a lot of ointments. And so that's a big problem. We solve that problem too. And as a matter of fact, that's the thing we're offering everybody who's a webinar listener tonight is we make something called Neutrolium instead of petroleum jelly. And we make a 3-ounce version of this as well as a 1-ounce version. And it's just 2 ingredients. It's glycerin, vegetable, organic, USP, which is US pharmaceutical grade glycerin, kosher, believe it or not. And we make one version with that and with ceteroglucoside, which is a plant fat. Those 2 ingredients together make this wonderful gel. And the third ingredient for the water resistant version is with beeswax. So we buy high mountain desert beeswax, believe it or not, from a real bunch of beehive folks that actually are beekeepers. And we mix that in to make it water resistant. So we actually have 2 different types. So it's an alternative to Vaseline is what it is. It's a lubricant. It can be used anywhere on the skin. It can be used as a lip balm, especially the water resistant version. And it is the basis for a lot of the products that we actually make. And of course, we say if you wouldn't put it in your mouth, don't put it on your skin. Mm-hmm. Food grade ingredients only. We buy food grade ingredients, not from China and other nefarious countries that might not have a very good quality control system. We source everything ourselves. We make sure that the ingredients are coming from places in the United States where you can get them. If you can't get them from the United States, in some cases, Japan, We have one ingredient that we put in our sunscreen from France, which is gamma oryzanol, which is a very strong antioxidant, which is another good thing to have to put on your skin in the presence of the sun. So I think the answer to your question is we also make a breath spray and a deodorant spray. So unfortunately, the old Banaka breath sprays that you might remember, they have red dyes in them, and they have preservatives in them that are toxic. Almost all the preservatives that are in cosmetics, personal care products, shampoos, deodorants, they're toxic. Again, definition being they kill cells on contact. These are chemicals that you don't want on your skin, you don't want in your body because they're toxic, right? You want to support your immune system. You want to support your skin, which is your largest organ. And of course, we do that because we use, instead of, for example, for deodorant spray, we use glycerin, water, and chelated silver oxide, which is antibacterial and antimicrobial. We can talk about silver maybe in a minute. And jojoba oil and aloe. And that's for a deodorant spray, not an antiperspirant. Antiperspirants, I'm sure most of the people that are listening in know that antiperspirants are not a good idea. There's a reason you need to perspire here. There's a reason that you need to, be able to perspire profusely when you exercise, and that is to get rid of the toxins that are in your body. As a chemical engineer, I'm trained about black boxes. Garbage in is garbage out, and the black box in our case is the body, the human body. And you know a lot more about that than I do. You know more about what's going on with DNA. I listened last night to your folks about receptors on cells. I'm too much of an engineer to understand all the biology involved. So I'm one of those people, like you said, who likes to solve problems. That's what engineers are trained to do. And so by solving problems, my problem solver was get rid of all the toxins. Well, easily said, difficult to formulate to do that. Very, very difficult. And going back 20 years when I started making the sunscreen, I was asking other people to try to make it, and they would always take off the shelf ingredients and put it in. And I said, no, I can't have that, right? They said, well, what's wrong with you? So the deodorant is a great example. We don't want antiperspirants. People talk about, breast cancer. Where's breast cancer coming from? Why are men getting breast cancer now? Well, back after World War II, the chemists and the lobbyists in the cosmetic industry did a great job of saying, well, if you're wet here and you smell, that's antisocial. You shouldn't be able to do that. You shouldn't be around people if you smell and you're wet there. Well, they made antiperspirants and antiperspirants with aluminum oxide, which the aluminum oxide by itself is not necessarily toxic. Neither is talcum powder by itself necessarily toxic, although there's some debate about the fact that talcum powder is actually very toxic, and a big company got sued for that, and they're appealing the suit still, but good luck. But the point is, you're not perspiring. So you're not getting rid of the toxins that your body's trying to get rid of, which are going to build up in your body if you drink anything, if you eat anything, if you exercise. Your body is designed to get rid of those toxins. And the way it's designed to get rid of them is by urination, which of course endocrine disruptors are going to disrupt, and to get rid of it by perspiration, which again, not just endocrine disruptors are disrupting, but if you put antiperspirants on, how are you going to profusely, be able to get rid of this by perspiring? And the answer is you won't. It's an antiperspirant. So now the toxins are building up here, right? Which is, here's your breasts, right? Here's where your toxins are building up. So if your immune system's impaired, voila, breast cancer. It doesn't take a big leap of understanding to know that, but unfortunately, we've been programmed to not perspire and not to smell. And that's true more in the Western hemisphere. I mean, parts of Asia too, but there are parts of Europe where women won't wear antiperspirants and they won't even shave their arms, which is, again, why not? Well, they understand that maybe it's healthy not to mess with anything there because that's where your glands are that are designed to get rid of toxins. So any interference with that builds toxins in an area that you certainly don't want to build them.
Yeah, you're reminding me.
Sorry, go ahead.
We have a study that was actually done in France where they biopsy dissected breast cancer tissue, the actual cancer tumors, and they found that 90%, so 9 out of 10 of the women they studied, had phthalates showing up in the breast cancer tissue, right? And where is that coming from? It's coming from the deodorant, it's coming from the cosmetics, the sunscreens, etc., that are ending up, because again, you have this lymph area here, right? The lymphs, they start here and they come down and then they get clogged up and they get into tissue they shouldn't. So 90% is not a coincidence, right?
Oh.
We're far beyond coincidence.
Oh.
And to what you were talking about earlier, just to be clear for everybody, because this thought does come up for people. They hear you say, "Hey, I made something that has 2 ingredients. It's awesome. It's food grade. You could literally eat it. That's how clean it is." And then the thought is, oh, well, the real stuff, the Vaseline or the sunscreen or the whatever, has 50 ingredients. Does your stuff actually work because you don't have the 50 ingredients? Right. So, I mean, some brilliant chemist somewhere said, here's the 50 ingredients we need for this job to happen, which is blocking the sun or healing your skin. So how is it possible that you can create this magic without it? And what I would say, just to be clear, and this is a general thought you need to have when approaching any natural health product, is that list of 50 ingredients isn't the priority, isn't efficacy. The priority isn't how good can this product be. It's shelf life, it's cost, it's what ingredient does the industry already supply. When I go to a wholesaler, custom versus off the shelf are 2 very different prices.
Definitely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so that's how products get designed. I'm working with a young lady right now in France who's very outspoken about cosmetics making women sick. And she's trying so hard to make a clean line, and supply chain is her problem. She just can't get the stuff. She knows exactly what to do. She just can't get the stuff, right?
Yes.
So in efficacy, the product working isn't why you see that list of ingredients, right? It has more to do with how long it's going to last, etc. So you really don't need much, right? For something to work, it's 1 or 2 or 3 ingredients, because the priority isn't shelf life and cost, but it's efficacy and it being clean and safe, and that's what Guerry does. So having said all that, I tried. So there's no secret here. Everyone knows that I've had skin issues, which is one of the things that drove me to working on the research with the DNA company, eczema, psoriasis, right? And we're constantly teetering on the edge of good health and bad health, surrounded by toxins, living in a sea of toxins. So I know that if I have one bad week, I will get eczema.
Mm.
And as much as I'm the healthiest I've ever been, I also know that that's my outcome. And canary in the coal mine, that's the thing that tells me that I pushed myself a little too hard. I ate a little too much nonsense. I breathed a little too much nonsense, too much stress, whatever, right?
Too much travel, whatever.
Yeah. And what's the response? I could either clean myself out and wait it out, or I can add a little bit of a topical steroid just to get there quicker and then detox, right?
Right.
I have done that in the past. I don't like to use medication, but this one I know, like a couple of days of this stuff gets rid of it, and now I have to go back to detoxing and cut the inflammation out.
Yes.
You sent me something, which was a topical gel,
right.
Food grade, that you told me go ahead and eat it, although I didn't. And I'm telling you, for everyone listening here, I had the same, if not better, outcome in terms of how fast it worked. And I tried everything. I tried nitric oxide. I was trying to find a natural solution because I am healthy. I don't have eczema, but if I make a mistake, I will get it. That's the first thing that happens to me. Headaches, eczema, right? And that's where I know I've pushed myself too hard.
Yep. Your immune system is impaired somehow.
Yeah. And I've tried the nitric oxide. I've tried, different gels, and I've tried all the stuff that you see in all the conferences. None of it actually will get rid of the problem. I have to wait it out while I'm detoxing, other than the medication. Your stuff is the only thing that I put on my skin that literally the next day I wake up and it's different. And it works the same pace, if not faster, than the actual steroid. So what is in that that's doing that if it's food grade?
Well, if it could be one of 2 different types of things that we make. We make something called Nutrisporin instead of Neosporin. Yep. And this is that gel that I mentioned, the Neutrolium gel that everybody can get for 80%. And that has chelated silver oxide in it,
right?
Which is antimicrobial, antibacterial, antifungal, anti-mold, anti-mildew. And then we also make this itch block product, which is
that's the one I was using.
That's the one, and this is chelated zinc oxide. So this goes back to the story about how this whole company started with sunscreen. We actually take zinc oxide, off the shelf zinc oxide, not treated with anything, not surface treated with silicone oil, like 90% of the products are. We take it and we chelate it with L-arginine. For the folks out there that don't know what chelation is, it's a mild reaction. But zinc oxide, and that if you remember back to that plot I showed with the green line versus the red and blue line, it turns out that zinc oxide, pure zinc oxide, you can't spread it. It's basically what the lifeguards put on their nose. Well, we basically took that and made it into a lotion. And the key to making that into a lotion was we had to chelate the zinc oxide with L-arginine. And by doing that, we were actually changing the surface chemistry of the zinc. And by changing the surface chemistry of the zinc, it never becomes zinc hydroxide. Zinc hydroxide is a salt. And that red and that blue line that I showed on that plot shows that all mineral sunscreens over time, they salt out because water, which we use, there's that plot again. The green and the blue line is everybody else's mineral sunscreen. That green line is the absorbance curve, not only for our sunscreen, but for pure zinc oxide. So it was a neat trick to try to figure that out. And of course, we patented it because you know what I do for a living. So that green line shows that we have basically taken what the lifeguards put on their nose and made it into a lotion. And the key for that was to chelate the zinc oxide with L-arginine. So that is what you put on, except we call it calamine lotion on steroids, because what it is calamine lotion is potassium, zinc oxide, and potassium hydroxide, which is pink. It's a pinkish looking color. Our product is pretty white looking, and because we use that L-arginine, which is an amino acid, and actually last night they talked about L-arginine a lot in terms of production of nitric oxide, right? L-arginine is the basis for creating nitric oxide in cells, depending on what cells what part of the cell receptors you're activating or not activating with L-arginine. So we've got L-arginine in spades with zinc oxide that you then put directly on your eczema areas, and it healed it rapidly and probably very, very effectively and probably overnight. I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, so I have to be careful how I say it. But
you're safe here. No, you're safe here.
I'm safe here. Okay. So it turns out that my kinesiologist chiropractor, who I've known since '84, who does muscle testing, helped me develop the sunscreen. We make an aromatherapeutic version, which is rosemary and frankincense, and an unscented version. The rosemary and frankincense version muscle tested positive for every single person. But the reason I bring that up is that this chelated zinc oxide product, which is in the sunscreen and in the what we call the itch block product, changes the pH as well. So it's very, very alkaline. And it turns out that zinc hydroxide also cannot form at a pH above 9.5 to about 10.5. And it can also not form at a pH of 3. Well, 3 is very, very acidic and not healthy. This Warburg guy that your audience probably knows about discovered many, many years ago, back in the 20s and 30s, that cancer cells cannot grow in an alkaline environment. So that was another reason when we went with an alkaline product. And of course, our sunscreen has just glycerin, no water, so it doesn't evaporate. Well, the itch block also, no water added, so it doesn't evaporate. There is some water in there because we chelate the zinc oxide with L-arginine in water. And then, believe it or not, we have to use a centrifuge to remove the water. So it's a very arduous process. And I don't recommend that anybody try this at home. And what we do is kitchen chemistry, and kitchen chemistry sounds easy until you try it in your laboratory.
No, for sure. And I appreciate that because I've formulated things in the past, right?
Right.
And it's nowhere near as simple as people think. Like, oh, I need to make some supplements. Here's 5 ingredients. Put them together. What's the dosage? What's the negative interaction between them? One voids the other one out. Those types of things to consider. And I can't imagine trying to come up with something so clean but so effective. I mean, kudos to you. Brilliant work. So
hard to do as you mentioned. And the reason is, like you said, it's a supply chain issue among other things. It's also why would you try to make things different now? We've been doing it for 50 years. Why should we change?
Yeah, for sure. So, I heard the stat the other day that smoking has come down, but lung cancer has gone up because of what we're breathing.
Right.
And so the air is now like as if you smoke, right?
Sure.
And the reason I bring that up is how ubiquitous this stuff is. You're walking around in toxic soup, right?
Yes.
And so we've been talking about products and how to replace what's in your medicine cabinet, right? Which is very important. And you've been kind enough to bring an 80% discount. That's not a typo. It says 80% discount so that people can just experience and see what's possible. And it's very kind of you to do that. The 80%, I'm sure you're losing money at that point, but you're
we're not making any.
So it gets people an opportunity to test things out, right?
Absolutely.
So that's one thing, but the other thing is what else do we have to think about in terms of what is ubiquitous that's sort of flying under the radar that we're not aware of?
Right. Well, so you brought it up. I just like you, I travel a lot because I also do patent work, and I went to an international conference in Singapore last November, and I also teach a course on sustainability at Duke. And what was really amazing in Singapore is that I could buy all the same products that I could buy in the United States. I went to the grocery store there several times. I even tried to get my products into some of the Singapore stores while I was there. I figured, well, why not? I went there for a patent conference, but what I saw was thousands of barges in the Singapore harbor. And you talk about something that's really a silent. Nobody talks about EV barges. Nobody talks about the pollution coming off of the barges. Nobody talks about these barges that contain millions of gallons of diesel number 6, which is one of the most toxic substances that you can either breathe or get near, full of polyaromatic hydrocarbons, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, the atmosphere is being polluted, and that is a huge atmospheric pollution. As a matter of fact, a long time ago, we had a conference where we had developed also a biofuel additive that reduces emissions and eliminates them. And we were up against a company that was putting kites on barges, and they were reducing the emissions of the barges by 1%. And their business plan said, well, by reducing the emissions of the barges by 1% globally, that would be equivalent to all of the automobiles emissions on the planet.
Yeah.
So now here we are 20 years later, 15 years later, it's even worse. We're importing and exporting stuff to every part of the globe. And the number of barges that are out there just continues to increase exponentially. So that's the air pollution issue. Now, what I talk about is chelated silver oxide, because that's, in a way, something that can help prevent mold, mildew, fungus issues that your body may have a hard time getting rid of in the presence of these toxins that you're breathing or drinking. People say, well, wait a minute, silver, I know colloidal silver. I don't know chelated silver oxide. We chelate with citric acid. So that's probably the subject of a whole nother, webinar maybe, because you talked last night about the cell receptors and how certain things get turned on or off, and certain receptors can accept, let's say, arginine to make more nitric oxide. For example, Dr. Lara had mentioned that. Well, with citric acid, it turns out citric acid is good for any aerobic cell. It's part of the Krebs cycle. It's part of what causes energy, which is part of the cellular cycle, right? They even call it the citric acid cycle instead of the Krebs cycle. And ATP, which is energy for the cell. And you know more about that than I do, Cash. But the silver oxide we make is chelated with citric acid. So we take an inorganic molecule, combine it with an organic molecule, and we have this very different silver compound, which gets absorbed by the cell, all the cells, intracellularly, quickly, and that wipes out all infectious bacteria, as well, everything we've exposed it to, as well as mold, mildew, fungus, which is unfortunately pretty much everywhere. And I tell people this, when you travel, whether it's on a plane, in the airport, in a restaurant, a hotel, whatever, and of course during COVID, we all found this out, you're going to be exposed. And then the only question is, can your immune system handle that? Like you said, when your immune system is slightly impaired, you know it because you've got eczema. When my immune system gets slightly impaired, I can have a lot of different things happen. So why silver? Well, because it works. It's agnostic when it comes to bacteria. It doesn't wipe out certain strains of bacteria. It wipes out all strains of infectious bacteria. And people say, well, what about good bacteria? And I say, well, yeah, it could wipe out some good bacteria, but hopefully every time you drink and every time you breathe, you're bringing in good bacteria. So your body, maybe you could take a pre or probiotic along with it if you needed to. But if you ever get E. coli poisoning, which is food poisoning, basically, God help you, right? You drink this stuff and it's gone. You'll wake up the next day not thinking about what you ate. You'll wake up hungry. So it's true. I think somebody said something about citric acid coming from corn. It does come from corn, mostly in the United States. We buy GMO product, which is from corn. But the thing that people don't understand is it's so far removed from corn. If you've ever been to a corn processing plant, they make cornstarch and they make animal and human feed from corn, and that's about it. And then they also can extract citric acid. But it's so far removed from corn that even if you have a corn sensitivity, it's the likelihood of you having any effect from citric acid is about zero. I've never heard of anyone having a problem with that because citric acid is the life form for keeping your cells healthy. And we talked from the very beginning of this webinar, we talked about the fact that cells that don't die are not being exposed to toxins, or maybe they die like your skin cells die because they're supposed to, because your skin always is renewing cells that die. But citric acid keeps cells healthy, and I view citric acid as that black box again, where I'm not talking about what's going on inside the black box as much as you are with the DNA and the cellular structure and the different pathways where things are being turned on or turned off depending on what's going on at the surface of the cell or inside the cell. But citric acid is going to get into every cell like instantaneously, and it's going to be you'll have the opportunity to keep them very, let's say, energetic, right? It's part of the ATP, it's part of the Krebs cycle, it's part of the citric acid cycle, whatever you want to call it. And, I don't know your view on all that, but it'd be good to hear, to tell your folks what you think.
Yeah, in production and formulating, what's misunderstood often is that, you're something from corn. So it feels like corn has been like mashed up and grounded and turned into a powder, but you're actually isolating a molecule, right? So that's all you have is the molecule. This is where you see, somebody like Bill Gates will drink sewage water from a filtration system because he knows all he's getting is H2O, even though 5 seconds earlier it was mixed in sewage, but completely isolated. So the thought might be gross, but when you have technology, whether it's membrane or whatever filtration system, it's an isolate. So there's nothing there other than that thing, the citrate. So the gluten is not a concern at that point. And since we answered a question, we might as well jump into more.
Sure.
And I can tell you what Guerry just said about the gut. I was at a conference. It was is it Denver, the low carb conference? Is that Denver?
Yes.
Yeah. So we were in Denver, and there's a woman that came up. I was actually talking to Guerry, and I actually was getting a bit of a tingle in my throat. So I walked up and said, "What do you got?" And he sprayed some silver in my throat. He said, "Don't worry, I'll be gone tomorrow." So there's another lady that came up and thanked him, and I was listening in and eavesdropping a little bit. And she essentially had a gut issue from whatever she was eating the night before. Guerry handed her over the silver and said, "Take this. It's going to kill whatever's disturbing you." And it went away. She literally, when she came to tell the Guerry, like, what is this stuff? How does this work? I don't get it. Like, it was just such an incredible outcome. So, but it's true. The chemistry doesn't lie, right? Silver will kill the nonsense. So take it in and you're good. Okay. There was one last question. We'll end there. But again, thank you everybody for being here tonight. We're going to quickly get to this question, then we'll make sure we end on time and respect Gary's time. Vitamin E. Do you use vitamin E? Yes, no, and why not? Or why?
The vitamin E is in the sunscreen. We do use it. We use a pure vitamin E, comes in an oil, 30,000 IUs, and it is a very good antioxidant. It's protective for the skin as well. Do I take vitamin E supplements? Actually, I take fish oil supplements.
Okay. Great. Guys, thank you again, everybody.
Thank you very much, Cash. It was great.
It was a pleasure, Gary. Always informative. Love talking to you.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll do it again sometime soon.
We will. Yeah. This is why people know why I end up at his booth at conferences, just sitting and and learning,
and vice versa.
And thank you again, guys, for attending tonight. Gary, thank you one last time. All right, guys. Good evening.
Thanks, Cash.
All right.
Peace out.
All right.
Thank you.